mic working? Can you hear me at the back? Hear me at the back. Okay. Now, can you hear me now? Okay, if the sound cuts out, please somebody let me know, okay? Well, thank you all for being here. I'm honored that you are. Thank you to Banyan Books for facilitating this event. I'll be reading from a number of books, most of which I bought at Banyan. And the problem is with me is I have an addictive personality. If there's such a thing, I have it. And so that means I can get hooked on anything. Now, whenever I run into a spiritual crisis, my way of dealing with it is to go out and buy another spiritual book, and which I don't read. But next time I run into another spiritual mud bath, I go out and buy another book. In fact, I buy several at one time. So Banyan has everything to be grateful for as far as I'm concerned, because I'm probably personally responsible for their annual profit, such as it might be. Sataram's little exercise here, when I tell you, this talk was entitled, Who Are We We're Not Addicted, The Possible Human. I didn't come up with that title. I never would have come up with that title because the answer is I don't know. You know, I just don't know the possible human. I mean, I don't know that I know. Therefore, I jumped at the chance of giving the talk because there was an opportunity to actually learn something. Like, rather than giving the same talk or variations on the same themes over, I'd have a chance to explore something new. And my immediate response to the question, the possible human, would have been, I don't have a clue. But then I realized, well, it's not true I don't have a clue, but that's all I have is some clues. So I'm not going to be answering the question for you tonight as to what the possible human is. At the very most, at the very best, and that'll have to be good enough, I'll be giving you some clues that I've begun to follow, or at least believe that are worth following to various degrees. But there's no completed answer here. I'll tell you the degree to which there's no completed answer here. When Sataram begins her exercises, and we're doing this breath, and by the way, I was thinking, you know, like, you go to a Catholic church, or, you know, people are doing their Christian thing, or praying, and what would happen if somebody took a silent film of this audience? You know, what religion is this that they're into? You know? But when she's doing her exercise, my mind right away, well, when is this going to be over so I can get on stage? No, I'm not doing that. I'm just sitting there trying to do the exercises. But my mind, the egoic mind, immediately wants what it doesn't have at that moment, which is attention. Which gives you a clue to the nature of the mind, as you know. It's all about the self. I'm talking about the egoic mind. And so that egoic mind has no idea what the possible human is. Or at least it thinks that the possible human is just the wanting something. Now, in this culture, we've made that into an ideology. We made that into a science. We made it into a philosophy of life. So that the North American belief, or the belief of any materialistic society, but particularly capitalist society, is that the nature of the human being is to be selfish, to be acquisitive, to be aggressive, and to be competitive. And this is who we actually are. And you know what? Scientists will actually find for you the selfish gene. There's even a book written with that title. No, that's not science, it's ideology. But it's an emanation of that egoic mind, the same egoic mind that sits there saying, when is it going to be my turn? So, I don't know where this talk's actually going to go. You're just going to have to meander along with me and hope that I cruise through some waters that are worth cruising through, and that we get somewhere at the end that's worth getting to. let me read you this book I got for free at a conference I went to recently. So I don't know if Banyan has it or not, but it's called the Panchatantra, which is an ancient Sanskrit book of stories. I never heard of it, but apparently it's the most famous book in the world. And it's a series of stories like Canterbury Tales or the Decameron or the Arabian Nights, which is there's a kind of format where one story follows another. So the format for this book is that there was this king somewhere in ancient India who was a great leader, and his name was Immortal Power, and he had 3 sons who were rather stupid, and he was kind of worried about passing on the kingdom to them because where will they take it? So he talked to his wise men who each gave their advice on how these rather obtuse, closed-minded sons can be turned into wise rulers. But all that would have taken many, many years. So finally he hears about a wise man who possibly can do it sooner. And this wise man comes and says, his name is Vishnu Sharman. "O king, listen, here's the plain truth. I'm not the man," and he says, "I don't want your money, I don't want you to pay me land grants, or I don't need your grains, I don't need your money. I'm 80 years old. I'm done with sensual desire. There's nothing you can give me," he says. "But I will teach your sons," he says. "My boasting arises from no greed for cash." He says, "I can do this." He says, "But I'm not boasting," he says. "Besides, I have no use for money. I'm 80 years old, and all the objects of sensual desire have lost their charm. But in order that your request may be granted, I will show a sporting spirit in reference to artistic matters. Make note of the data. If I fail to render your sons in 6 months' time incomparable masters of the art of intelligent living, then His Majesty is at liberty to show me His majestic bare bottom." That's my promise to you. If I don't give you anything tonight. Well, in preparation for this talk, as I was preparing to give this talk, a friend of mine who I met last summer, sent me a poem by Adyashanti. And Adyashanti is one of the current spiritual masters whose books and DVDs I have bought at Banyan. And I've read 4 pages of one of them and listened to a number of the CDs. And I love Adyashanti. I just love his presence. How many of you know his work? A few of you do. But somebody sent this poem, and she said, "Sunyata, are you here tonight?" "Yeah, hi. You sent me this?" "Yeah." And Sunyata sent me this with the message that this is just perfect for your talk, because this is who we actually are. And so here's a poem by Adyashanti, who says, "Who are you?" And he says, "You are beyond the body, mind, and personality, beyond all experience and the experiencer thereof, beyond the world, etc. Be still and awaken to the realization of who you are." And it talks about your supreme reality, and you're the formless source. And the more I read this, the more infuriated I get, Sunyata. Not at you. But at this message that, and Eckhart Tolle, another great teacher, he talks about, how we're being, and we're not the egoic mind, and we're presence. When I hear this stuff, it drives me crazy. Part of me drives me crazy because, on the one hand, something in me recognizes the truth of it, but there's no way I can get there. I've never experienced myself as any of those things. So I thought in preparing this talk, for me to stand up here and give you all these spiritual truths about, when we're not addicted, we're presence. And when we're not addicted, then we're love. And when we're not addicted, then we're wisdom. And we're being. And we're the universe. And we're connection. I'm sure all that stuff is true. But I've never been there. How can I stand here and give you all that stuff? Out of the mouth of an Adyashanti who's had that experience. And I genuinely sense that he has. those are not cliches. Those are just a reality that he's embodying. But for me to give you those words would be absolutely a lie. So that's not what I can tell you. That's not what I can tell you at all. The only clue I can give you is how perhaps to get there, or at least how to get beyond this egoic mind of ours. Because I very well know that that little mind of mine that jumps around when Sadharam is bringing us into the presence, and that little mind of mine that jumps around all about the self, and it creates a film over my experience of the world. It creates a barrier between myself and the universe, a barrier between myself and my deeper self, a barrier between myself and other people, and a barrier between myself and nature. Karl Marx said that alienation basically has four aspects. We're alienated from nature, we're alienated from our true selves, we're alienated from other people, and we're alienated from our work, so that what we do does not represent who we are. So the nature of the society is that it promotes those alienations. And the mechanism of that alienation is that very egoic mind that in me is extraordinarily prominent and is very much in charge of my mental life. So in this Radyashanti poem, though, there's the clue. He says, be still and awaken to the realization of who you are. Well, be still, he says. The problem is really that we don't know how to be still, and the mind does not know how to be still. And so that if I don't know, if I haven't experienced perhaps what he's experienced, it's likely due to the fact that my mind has not been still long enough to experience any of that stuff. And I do everything in my power very often to keep it from being still. So we escape stillness. So in Joan of Arc, one of the plays by George Bernard Shaw, Joan, the French young woman visionary and military leader, is talking to the king of France. And the king says, and of course Joan hears voices. Today she would probably diagnose as schizophrenic. And these voices are telling her. I mean, imagine, this of course really happened. Imagine if some young woman went up to Stephen Harper and said that, I hear voices and they're telling me that you shouldn't allow the pipeline from the northern... Well, I mean, she'd be hustled off to a psychiatric institution and be drugged full of the modern miracles of medication. But in this case, of course, Joan was heard for a while by those that mattered. So the king says to Joan, why aren't the voices come to me? Why don't they come to me? I'm the king, not you. And Joan says, they do come to you, but you don't hear. You don't hear them. You have not sat in the field in the evening listening for them. When the bell rings, you cross yourself and have done with it. But if you prayed from your heart and listened to the thrilling of the bells after they stop ringing, you would hear the voices as well as I do. So that I could complain Why can't I have that experience that other people have had of the being and the presence and the stillness and the unity and all the beauty? Or I could actually notice that I've never stayed still long enough for that to happen. I've not trained my mind in that particular way. And that's, of course, I'm so excited to working with Sadhguru in this course, because I can see right away that it'll get me out of my mind. Out of your mind is supposed to be a bad thing. What are you, out of your mind? Thank God I'm out of my mind, finally, you know. And so I do get that it's not about what anybody else will teach me. And it's not about what I'm going to teach you either. Jesus says to his followers at some point, when he's going to leave them, he says, I'm going to leave you soon, he says, and I'm leaving you, he says, for your own good. Because if I stayed around, you'd never learn. Because you'd be looking to me. But I'm going to send you the Comforter, he says, which is the Holy Spirit, which is actually the inner voice. And Jesus at another point says to his followers, that which you shall bring out of you will save you. That's what you will bring out of you will save you. So when it comes to addictions or any other problem we're facing, it doesn't do to look for the solutions on the outside. That's a clue. It doesn't look for the solutions from the outside. There are no solutions from the outside. There are no solutions from the outside. The medical profession exemplifies that to the nth degree. Because what we basically do as physicians is we would take addicted people or depressed people or anxious people, and not for a moment do we believe that they have the truth within themselves. Not for a moment do we believe that the healing power resides in us all. Not for a moment do we have any idea how to encourage, invigorate, and empower that healing capacity that we all have. What we do instead is we replace one pharmaceutical with another. For your depression, here's the pill. Now, and I'm not even saying that I'm against pills for depression. I've taken them myself and they've really helped me. But they're never the solution. They're not the answer. At the very best, they buy you some time. But then we stop there. We think this is it. The solution is, you have a problem, here's something from the outside, take this, and then you'll be okay. The kind of getting into your body that Sadhguru was initiating here, and the kind of looking at the nature of our mind that I'm encouraging in this conversation never occurs to the mainstream healing profession in this country or in this Western world, which is why we're so far away from understanding or being able to solve any problem at all. Now, the first thing we have to understand is that when we have a difficulty, any kind of difficulty at all, there's two ways to approach it. So you can say, I have a problem with addiction, or my son or daughter has a problem with addiction. And how do I get rid of this problem? But as the spiritual teacher Almas points out, and do I have the right quote? No, here it is. And I bought his books at Banyan, by the way. He says, all the difficulties you experience, all the problems you have, exist quite simply because you don't want to grow up. On some level, we don't want to take responsibility. So the question is how to take responsibility. And furthermore, he says that the reality is that every problem that we have can be looked at two ways. We can look at it as a difficulty to get rid of, or we can look at it as a message from our true selves. We can look at it as something to overcome and get through, or we can see it as a possibility of learning. And he says that all the difficulties that we have are actually designed for us by a part of ourselves that loves us so much that'll create extra difficulties for us if we don't get the message. What else can it do? So that I've actually had people with cancer come and say to me, you know what, this cancer is the best thing that ever happened to me. And I've had people who've overcome addictions say to me, the addiction which gave me HIV is the best thing that ever happened to me. Now, what on earth are people talking about? And I don't say that I recommend those ways of learning. But what they are saying is that those difficulties woke them up to the necessity of getting to know themselves. That the cancer woke them up to the necessity of getting to know themselves and to accept themselves, and yes, to love themselves. And but for those experiences, they were too stubborn to learn. They were just going to stumble along life, living an alienated existence, and they were never going to wake up to who they really were. So what Amos is saying is that any problem comes along not in order to make our lives miserable, but actually in order to make our life less miserable. And the suffering that it imposes is an attempt to wake us up. And if we wake up, we'll have a reason to be grateful. Again, I'm not saying that I recommend either cancer or addictions as a way of learning. But what I am recommending is that if they do come along, or if anything comes along, we take it as an opportunity to learn. We take it as a God-given gift that is here to wake us up. And unfortunately, many of us need many, many wake-up calls, and I'm not somebody who's very quick to learn. It takes a long time to wake me up, and even after I wake up for a while, my tendency is very much to go back to sleep. But remember, the question is the possible human? Well, what I'm saying here is that the very possibility of being human is inherent in dealing honestly and openly with our difficulties. That's what makes us human. That dealing honestly and openly and courageously with our difficulties is exactly what makes us human. And the people that are too afraid to do that, well, I'm tempted to say they go into politics, but that's a whole other conversation. That's a whole other conversation, although there's a lot of truth in it. Because then they try to act on the world rather than first acting on themselves. Now, the possible human, I was going to bring you a quote, but I left it at home, but I'll tell you about it. I recently read a book by a Canadian, American-Canadian academic called Mark Lewis, and it's called Memoirs of an Addicted Brain. Really a wonderful read. And he himself is a neuroscientist who goes through his own addictions, and he gets addicted to everything, like starts from pot to alcohol to heroin to ecstasy or other substances like that, ketamine, what have you. So he goes through the whole gamut of addictions. And he talks about the physiology of the addicted brain as well. Now, at a certain point, he's in Malaysia, and he's tramping through the jungle with some fellow scientists. And he runs across this, or in a clearing, they find these two people, a father and son, of one of the native Malaysian. They're not Malaysian, they're actually a more original than the Malaysians. But it's in that area somewhere. This tribe, this jungle tribe, and these two people are standing there. And I wish I could have read to you the eloquent description of these two human beings. But the fundamental sense of it is that they are two real people, absolutely grounded in themselves, comfortable with who they are, confident about who they are, not at all egotistical, neither afraid nor aggressive, and they feel safe and very much rooted in their world. It's a beautiful description. And of course, Lewis contrasts the confidence and stillness and presence of these two people with his own neurotic, troubled, uncomfortable in his own skin consciousness. And he says it's possible to be like that the very possibility of being like that excited him. So when we talk about the possible human, we're not just talking about some faraway ideal that maybe will exist at some point in the future. And there's a kind of an idea these days that we're evolving to something higher. I don't go along with that. That something higher has already existed and still exists in a very few rare places in the world where so-called civilization hasn't intruded. It's not that we have to evolve into something higher. It's that we have to shed the mental and spiritual pollution that so-called civilization has instilled in our minds and in our souls and in our personalities. And that's not a personal problem. It's not a problem of me in this individual. It's not my failure. It's not your failure. If you're not comfortable in your skin, if you're not as grounded, present, still, confident, self-regarding, in a positive sense, individual, that's not your personal failure. This is the culture that we live in. But that possibility is inside all of us. That's our true nature. That's actually who we are. So we're not talking about some future evolution. We're talking about what's here right now in terms of possibility. And so, from that point of view, I'm very happy with Almas's definition of enlightenment. Because when he talks about enlightenment, he says it's very simple. It's not this grand recognition of the unity of all. Although it's clear to me that he's experienced that. When I listen to him, that's the sense I get. And I had that experience almost once. But it was under the influence of a substance. The substance was ayahuasca, which is a great spiritual teacher. And I'm not going into that conversation right now. But I set this intention before the ceremony of experiencing God. I was going to go for it. I was going to go for the big enchilada, you know. I was going to, for once I wanted to experience God, you know. Because people have, you know, or universality, or whatever the word is. I mean, God is just a word, right? And I wasn't going to experience any particular religion. I just wanted to get the whole picture. And I've seen people do it. I've been in retreats, you know, where people have these spiritual experiences where they really get the connection, oh, the love, the beauty, and they're getting that, and I'm sitting there seething with rage. Because they're getting it and I'm not. An egoic mind can only think in terms of loss. If somebody's getting something, then I'm not getting it. It's like the cake is only this big, and if somebody else gets spirituality, then I'm not getting it, and why, it's not fair, you know? Anyway, I did the ceremony, and I had the influence of the teacher, ayahuasca. No angels, no staircases, you know, leading up to the heaven, no trumpets in the sky, nothing. Okay? I missed it again. And then I go outside, and there are the trees, looking like trees. But all of a sudden, they're not like trees. They're real beings who are somehow, they're not talking to me, but they're communicating with me. They're not saying anything in particular, but they're not separate from me, is what I'm saying. Then this flock of Canada geese. And I got it. That's God. She or he is not going to show up with trumpets and angels, not for me anyway. But it's been there all along. And all that morning, I was just looking at the trees and the geese and the grass, and there was this perfect unity. I had the experience. But of course, the experience was induced because the plant was in me. So I could see things that otherwise I can't see. And by a week later, the trees were just trees again. Except when I look at trees now, I kind of say to them, and I have said this, you can't fool me. I know you're in there. Well, of course, the trees are not trying to fool me. I'm not the one that ends up fooling me, and it's that addicted mind of mine. And so Alma says that the enlightenment is not really this big experience. All it is, if for a moment you cannot be controlled by your mind, by your personality, then in that moment you're enlightened. And that doesn't take much. It's work, but it's not like having to experience angels and trumpets. It's just not allowing that conditioned mind to control who you are. And of course, all addiction is all about the conditioned mind controlling you. There are 4 qualities that I can see that are needed for this kind of work, to get behind the conditioned mind that drives addiction, is compassion for the self, number 1. And compassion is so lacking in this society, and particularly compassion for the self is so lacking in this society. The epidemic of cosmetic surgery. It's a massive epidemic of lack of self-compassion. People just cannot accept themselves the way they are. And of course, society says, and you shouldn't accept yourself the way you are, because you're not good enough. But people say to me sometimes in workshops, I've never loved myself. I can't love myself for a second. And that's because they don't see love when they see it. Because they think that self-love is some kind of emotion. They think that for self-love, how many of you think that you don't love yourself? Have you had that experience of not loving yourself? Yeah? Well, the fact is, if you didn't love yourself, what the heck are you doing here? The very fact that you're here means that you love yourself. Because something about this topic said to you that there's a possibility of transformation. There's a possibility of being human, and by being human, all I mean is being comfortable in your own skin as you are. Just like those 2 people I told you about. There's a possibility of that, and I'm worth it enough that I'll take myself to this event and see if I can learn something that'll help me get there. That already is self-love. So in other words, self-love doesn't have to show up in terms of gooey emotions or some kind of a warm-hearted regard for the self. Maybe you've never had, I've never loved myself in that way. I've never sat there, I really love myself, But when I look at it, knock on wood, and I'll acknowledge myself, I've done a lot of things that have supported my learning. That's self-love. And that's all I mean, is some compassion. That there's something else is possible, and that you're worth that possibility. That's all I mean. That's a necessary quality for dealing with addictions. There needs to be some courage, a willingness to look at how it actually is. Not how you'd like it to be, but how it actually is. And so that one of the prime qualities of addiction is denial. So that the people that are addicted to profit, they will actually deny that the Alberta oil sands are going to pollute the environment. The evidence is clear from people who have worked on the project. I don't have to go into the details of that tonight. But not to see that, and it's not just that they're denying it, it's not that just they know it and they deny it. They actually make themselves believe that it's not going to happen. That's the addicted mind. So in order to get over addiction, you have to actually have the courage to look at how things actually are inside here. And there has to be awareness, again, what Jesus says, that in order to heal, you have to bring outside of yourself what is inside yourself. What you bring outside yourself will heal you. And finally, you have to disidentify from the experience. Now, when somebody stands up at an AA meeting, and I am very much in favor of the 12 steps, so this is not a knock on the 12 steps, but when somebody says, I'm so-and-so and I'm an alcoholic, something in me doesn't quite like language. Because the language identifies the person with the experience and says, I am that experience. Well, you're not that experience. Addiction is not a person. Addiction is not who you are. When you say, I'm an addict, well, nobody is an addict. That's not who you are. Even when people say, and I had to, when James said it in his introduction, when he said that somebody's a survivor, well, as long as we don't take those categories as categorical, as long as we don't take those categories as defining anybody, because nobody is a survivor, that doesn't define who they are. Because when you say I'm a survivor, you're simply defining yourself in terms of the past. In the present, you're not a survivor. You are whoever you are in the present. The fact that you survived something doesn't make you into a survivor. So those statements are both true and not true. But we have to disidentify. We have to let the identification with the experience go. So that if you understand that addiction is not who anybody is, it's just an experience. And who you are is never an experience. Even if you had the experience even if you're 49 years old and you had the experience for 40 years, that still does not mean that you are that experience. So we have to let go of that identification. Now the second question, and then another question we have to ask is, what experiences do we keep creating for ourselves that keep us in these addictive patterns? So what experiences do I generate that keep me in the addictive experience? So let me tell you about myself a little bit. Not that I haven't been all evening, but let me tell you a little bit more about myself. I've just come through a 4 or 5 week absolute funk. I mean, I was depressed. I mean, you might say that had I been in a different phase of my life, I might have said, okay, great, time for the antidepressant. Because some days it felt that lousy. Now, of course, you know, this is just after a real addictive run in my life. Addicted not to substances, not to shopping, not to any of the usual stuff. On the 1st of December, I flew to Albany, New York, where I spoke on the 2nd, the afternoon of which I flew to LA, where I spoke on the 3rd. And on the morning of the 4th, I was going to come back to Vancouver and then to Victoria the same day to lead a 5-day retreat, which, thanks to Health Canada, was canceled. That's a long story, but it was going to be with ayahuasca, and they said, buddy, don't do this. And they were looking out for my health. They said, yo, you're traveling too much, you know. Stay home, take care of yourself, you know. But the previous month had been all like that. And I'm feeling good. And I'm in my element, I'm in my power, and I'm present with people, and I'm speaking the truth, and people are appreciating it, and I'm responding to them in the moment. And I come home, and within a day, I crash. I have severe back pain, I can barely get out of my chair, and I get more and more depressed. And, of course, I become totally addicted. What did I become addicted to? Not so much the feedback. It's not that I go out and people hear me and they applaud. I mean, that's nice, but I see past that. I know that that's not me. But what I do get addicted to, personally, I'm just talking about myself here. I'm talking about the subtle nature of addiction. What I do get addicted to is being that person who can do that. Being that person who can speak the truth. Like perhaps if I'm at all on my game, I might be doing tonight. That's for you to judge. But then I get addicted to being that person. And when I'm not doing it, the crash invariably comes. Now, who creates that? I create it by doing way too much. James mentioned my book, When the Body Says No. And I tend to believe, somehow, there's a belief in here that I'm immune to what I teach. That I can teach people all this stuff, which is true, that I've learned in the world, but somehow the rules that seem to apply to everybody else somehow have left me free to be exactly the way my egoic mind wants me to be. No wonder then I come home and I go through the typical withdrawal of the addict. Depression, irritability, physical pain. So that in dealing with the addiction, we also have to ask is, okay, I may not be the experience. I am not that experience. But what experiences do I generate for myself that keep me in the experience of addiction? Now, why is it so difficult? Why is it so difficult to get out of these habits? Why is it so hard? Albert Camus in The Plague, a wonderful novel, takes place in Algeria, and it's about a bubonic plague which takes over the city. As you know, it's by a bacillus that is spread by rats. And his Dr. Roux, who is one of the leaders in the fight against the bubonic plague, at the very end of the novel, the plague is beaten back, the city revives, the healthy can start living again, free from the fear of the plague, and so everybody's happy. And the last paragraph of the book is very sobering. Now, I believe that Camus may have meant this as an allegory for fascism, but I think it's an allegory for something much bigger than that. And so he writes in the last paragraph, and indeed, as he listened to the cries of joy rising from the town, Roux remembered that such joy is always imperiled. He knew what these jubilant crowds did not know, but could have learned from books, that the plague bacillus never dies or disappears for good, that it can lie dormant for years and years in the furniture and linen chests, that it hides its time in bedrooms, cellars, trunks, and bookshelves, and that perhaps the day will come when, for the bane and enlightening of men, it roused up its rats again and sent them forth to die in a happy city. And what he's talking about for me, beyond the possibility of fascism, is also the nature of the egoic human mind, because actually on the political level, fascism is simply the highest representation of the egoic human mind. The Führer, the I, the ego. But that's the ego inside all of us. And it threatens to come back all the time. The Buddha has this image, a very powerful image, a very disturbing image of two strong men pulling a weaker one towards an abyss in which they're going to hurl him, casting him to his death. And the weaker man resists and digs his feet into the ground and tries to save himself from perdition, but of course they're stronger than he is. And the Buddha says those two strong men are our habit energies. Our habit energies. They're the ingrained habits of the mind. And that weaker one is ourselves. And those habit energies, just like Camus says that the plague can come back, in the same way, those habit energies can assert themselves almost at any time. So it does take vigilance not to be an addict in a society. So there's some truth when the person stands up, I haven't drunk for 40 years, but my name is so-and-so, an alcoholic. As much as I don't like the phrase, there's a truth in it. Because the truth is that the possibility of addictive behavior is still very much within me, and I need vigilance to overcome that. I can never take it for granted that it's totally gone. And so that's just the nature of the human mind, because these habits are ingrained very, very early, and the needs are ingrained in the brain very, very early. And furthermore, of course, it's in the very nature of the thinking mind. It's difficult, as Michael Braun, who is another writer whose book I bought at Banyan, as he says, it's difficult to think outside the box because the thinking is the box. And that's where the yoga work comes in, is because it gets us outside that thinking mind. So if we have a hard time thinking our way past our addictions, don't worry about it. That's the very nature of the thinking mind, that it itself is a representation of addiction. And it's very self-oriented, as Eckhart Tolle points out, that the structure of the egoic mind is wanting. The wanting is structural. Hi TJ. What we want may change. So what I want may be at a certain time this, shopping for this, or wanting that from the world, or wanting, so the content may change. But the wanting is structural. And that's what I mean in my book, Hungry Ghosts, about the addiction process. So that there's a fundamental addiction process. That's the same for every addict. And I define addiction as any behavior that is associated with craving, temporary relief, and an inability to give it up despite negative consequences. But it goes way beyond them. That's the nature of it. Wanting, craving, temporary relief when you get it, and long-term negative consequences. And that's what an addiction is. And that wanting is structural in the egoic mind. No wonder then we have such a problem with addictions in this society, which promotes that, as I'll say in a moment. And Almas has got a wonderful image, funny and maybe disturbing at the same time. Basically all just babies wanting a tit to suck on, he says. We look at every other human being as a tit. And we're wondering, where's the nipple? And is it big enough? Is it contain enough milk for me? And will I like the milk? Or will it turn sour? Is it going to make me feel good, or will it give me a tummy ache? Or is the tit too big and will it smother me? So he says, basically, all human beings, we're all like a bunch of tits walking around looking for the nipple. Well, again, that's just another way of saying what Tolle also says, is that the wanting is structural. So that when you say to yourself, I'm an addict, well, no, you're not. You're a human being. You're a human being. The degree of your wanting, of course, is related to the degree of emptiness that you experience, and that the degree of emptiness that you experience is very much related to what happened to you very early in life. And before I go there, let me just also say that, again, it's not a personal problem, it's in the very nature of the world. And in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, the Sogyal Rinpoche says that the greatest achievement, he says, of our Western civilization, he says, the greatest achievement of modern culture, he says, is the brilliant selling of samsara. Samsara meaning the Sanskrit term for suffering. So that the greatest achievement of our culture, he says, is the brilliant selling of suffering. And its barren distractions. Modern society seems to me, he says, a celebration of all the things that lead away from truth, make truth hard to live for, and discourage people even from believing it exists. So that the very culture we live in denies that there's truth, makes people hungry, hurts people, leaves them isolated, therefore empty, therefore wanting satisfaction from the outside, therefore addicted, and then it creates all these products and all these activities and all these cultural diversions to fill the very emptiness that it creates. And then they say, that selfishness is the nature of human beings. And there's the complete circle of the ideology. Well, as Eckhart points out, that every addiction arises from an unconscious refusal to face and move through your own pain. Every addiction starts with pain and ends with pain. And as I've often said, in the downtown East Side, where I worked for 10 years, I hardly met any woman, and really maybe one, I remember meeting one, who said she had not been sexually abused, everybody else had been. So that the greater the pain, the greater the addiction. And that pain always goes way, way back. There's a very interesting relationship between the word attachment and the word attachment. In Buddhist terms, attachment is the craving and the holding on to things. in an unhealthy way. We're attached to our possessions, we're attached to our looks, we're attached to all the things that are passing and evanescent, temporary and unsatisfying. And that's what creates suffering, is the attachment. So there's that word attachment in the Buddhist sense. Then there's the word attachment in the modern psychological sense. And attachment means love. Attachment means the drive to be close to somebody in order to be taken care of or in order to take care of. So that in my book with Gordon Neufeld on Hold On to Your Kids, about the need for children to attach to parents and what happens when that attachment is lost, we're talking about attachment in a positive sense. It's very interesting that the same word is used because the reality is the less you had of that positive attachment, the more you're going to have of that negative attachment. So the degree to which you attach to food, the degree to which you attach to substances, the degree to which you attach to attention, the degree to which you attach to television, any external behavior. And as somebody said, all addictions are ways of trying to get from the outside, trying to solve your problems from the outside. So the more attached you are to getting something from the outside, the more it means that you never had in the first place the attachment in the positive sense. So addictions, there's no big, again, the profession and thinkers and so on, they make a big mystery out of addiction. What is this all about? Why would people do these things to themselves which hurt them and destroy them and blight the lives of their children and their families? There's no big mystery about it. The less attachment you had, the less your attachment needs were met as a child, the more attached you're going to be to getting it from the outside. And you might get it through relationships. So, for example, you might never have a substance addiction in your whole life, but you just might be a nice person. And you're a nice person all the time because you need to be liked. Why did you ever need to be liked? Because you did not get your attachment needs met. You were not accepted for who you were. You were not loved for who you were. Therefore, in order to get love, that song, you might as well face it, you're addicted to love. Well, that's the nature of this society. A lot of us are addicted to love, and a lot of us will we contort ourselves into pretzels in order to get that love. So some people are very, very nice, and they make themselves very, very nice. So nice they end up getting cancer. And that cancer is very much a manifestation of not having been loved in the first place, and therefore they suppress themselves in order to be liked, and that self-suppression ends up suppressing their immune system. That again is a whole other conversation, but that too comes from the need to get something from the outside. So the less we had that attachment given to us in the first place, the more we try and crave it and try and get it from the outside, which is the very nature of addiction. So at the heart of addiction, there's loss and there's pain. And what is the nature of that pain? And Eckhart says that basically all emotions are modifications of one primordial, undifferentiated emotion that has its origin in the loss of awareness of who you are. And so that the big loss is not that your mother didn't love you, or your father didn't love you the way, or even that they abused you. That's not the big loss for any of us. And so, in my work, although it's important to understand what happened to people as children, it's not sufficient. It doesn't matter how many times you go through the trauma that you experienced as a 5-year-old, whether you were abused or mistreated or what. It doesn't matter, because that wasn't your big problem. And as Alma says really eloquently, he says, the fundamental thing that happened and the greatest calamity is not that there was no love or support. The greater calamity, which was caused by that first calamity, is that you lost the connection to your essence. That is much more important than whether your mother or father loved you or not. So the big thing then is not to focus on what happened externally and how do I get that from the outside, but how do I reconnect to myself? And that reconnection to the self doesn't happen through here. Because if it happened through here, boy, I'd be the most enlightened person in the world. Because I've thought about this, and I've thought about this, and I've thought about this. And I've written about it. And people write to me, they do. Thank you, your book changed my life. I'm thinking maybe I should read it myself. Because thinking about it, and even talking about it, and teaching it, and helping other people get there doesn't get me there. Because you can only get there in here. You can only get there through the body. You can only get there at the very core of your being. So there's nothing out there. There's nothing I'm going to say. There's nothing else anybody else is going to say that's going to get you there. All the teachers tell you that. And all anybody can give you is just clues. So I hope I've given you some clues tonight. But let me finish with a quote which, you know, as it says in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, so whatever you do, don't shut off your pain, accept your pain, and remain vulnerable. All these things we do to get away from pain, like being nice or doing substances. Don't shut off your pain. However desperate you become, accept your pain as it is, because it is in fact trying to hand you a precious gift, the chance of discovery through spiritual practice what lies behind sorrow. And don't we know, he says, and only far too well, that protection from pain doesn't work, and that when we try and defend ourselves from suffering, we only suffer more, and then we don't learn what we can from experience. Or as Amos says, the surest way to get to hell is to resist going to hell. But I also know this, and do I know it? I do know it. Do I embody it all the time, or much of the time? No, I don't. Do I know it? Yes, I do. And there's a deeper knowing that just says aha to something. And I'm sure that that deeper knowing is in you and in all of us. And this is the possibility of being human. And the Buddha said, he talked about the interconnection of all things. He says, contemplate the nature of interconnected arising during every moment. When you look at a leaf or a raindrop, meditate on all the conditions, near and distant, that have contributed to the presence of that leaf or raindrop. Know that the world is woven of interconnected strands. This is because that is. This is not because that is not. This is born because that is born. This dies because that dies. The birth and death of any dharma or any phenomena, he means in this sense, are connected to the birth and death of all other phenomena. The one contains the many, and the many contains the one. Without the one, there cannot be the many, and without the many, there cannot be the one. So that sense of connection with which Sadhharam ended her exercise is also where I would like to leave you. Because I know that I'm really talking to brothers and sisters. I know that every single one of you have experienced that dancing monkey of the egoic mind. I know that it's been active in many of you even during this conversation. And then why shouldn't it be? That's the nature of it. But I also know that doesn't make you into an addict. It just means that that's the experience that you're having. And I also know that the sense of connection that Sadhharam's exercise encouraged in us, when we're able to be still and we're able to pay attention to what's actually there, then that sense of connection isn't just an idea, it's actually a reality way beyond the separation that the mind would otherwise impose. Thank you very much.